Hello, everybody. Today, we are going to talk about something I'm very familiar with, and that is both list pulling and skip tracing. What I want to cover are 3 things I've learned from pulling and skip tracing over 1.4 million properties. Realistically, this number is probably closer to around 2.5, maybe even 3 million records because I've just been tracking this since 2017 using Investors Title's Toolbox. But I've also used ListSource, PropStream, and some other list pulling tools over the years as well. I truly realized how many records I actually have been pulling over the years when I logged into Investor Title Toolbox just to check up and see how many records I pulled for that current month. But then I saw I pulled over 1.4 million records since I've had this account. This is just taking in consideration since 2017. And I've also pulled multiple lists and other tools before then. I wanted to mention this because you can probably get some good insights from what I've done. And I feel like I've pulled enough records in multiple list pulling tools to know the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, and what you need to look out for, and also some areas where you'll get tripped up on. So let's go ahead and go back to my Google Doc here and talk about this. So the first insight that I got from actually pulling all these records was pulling specialty lists, meaning niche lists like foreclosures, probates, code violations. These can only sustain you for so long. And I actually kept on getting in the position where I would go in a new market, a virtual market, and let's just say I'm going into Houston, and I would want to get the best list of records there. So naturally, in my mind, I would think, okay, let me pull some code violations, are some probates, are pre-foreclosures. Now, the issue with these lists is that they're finite. There's only so many records that you can pull. When it comes down to inherited properties and probates, you're really dependent on people passing away, unfortunately, for your list to grow bigger. I kept on finding myself in a situation where I pulled as many records as I could on a particular niche list. I want to demonstrate this point by going over to Investor's Title Toolbox, and here we have all of the properties in the last 24 months that have had liens on them. So liens filed with the county. And in the last 2 years, we have 21,000 properties. This may seem like a lot, but guys, I'm telling you, you can cold call or text this list and go through it within a month. And it will probably last you for maybe 2 months. 3 months is really the max all of these records will last you before you have to stop targeting this list, because the list will just get fatigued. And when your list gets fatigued, you stop generating leads. The sellers start getting more frustrated with you calling them so often. It's just not a good thing. So 21,000 records is a lot initially, but when you're talking about a long campaign over the course of a year, this really isn't that many records. And you have to think about how many records are being added a month. I would probably say maybe only like 100. Even if it's 1,000 added a month, that's not enough for you to get a large enough list to target to make any sort of waves and essentially to close a deal. So when you look at this, it may look good initially, but you have to understand that this is it pretty much. Once you pull these records, that's it. And this goes for any other niche list. That's why I really don't like pulling lists that are dependent on a specific type of criteria like liens. My lists are more broad, yet targeted. And I go over in some of my other videos about how I target my lists. So please watch those. You will learn the process I use in my virtual markets to target sellers and not have too broad of a criteria where you're just pulling everybody and your campaign isn't really successful, but also not going too targeted where it's limiting you and how many records you can pull over the course of a year. So this is something very important to note. The next insight I got was that I should really only stick with one list pulling tool and one skip tracing vendor. It took me about 2 years to really settle on the one that I like using, which is Investor's Title Toolbox. That is a tongue twister, but that is a tool I like using. Investor's Title Toolbox. I'm not going to say that too many times because I will trip up. But that's really the best one I use. And this comes down to personal preference, guys. I'm not saying use one over the other. I'm just saying whatever you use, just use it consistently. Because what's going to happen is Everything in your business is predicated off of your list pulling and your skip tracing. Let's just say you've been switching from list pulling tool to skip tracing vendor every time you need to pull and skip trace a new list. And you have a campaign and you've been using data that you've been getting essentially a 70% hit rate on, meaning if you submit 1,000 records, you get about 700 records back with phone number. And let's just say you've been doing this for about 6 or 7 months. Then you decide to switch to another skip tracing company that gives you a 90% hit rate. That will give you about 900 records back with phone numbers if you submit 1,000 records. So if you start calling this other list with the 90% hit rate, you may think in your mind that that list may have performed better or that skip tracing company would have been better, when in actuality, it really just comes down to how many records you're calling. Of course, the one with 90% hit rates will seem like it's better. Why? Because you're getting in contact with more sellers. So getting more phone numbers are good, but they have to be accurate as well, or else you're just wasting your money at that point calling wrong numbers. So I hope that drives home the point in saying that if you are using a particular data provider or skip tracing tool, just use one, because it's going to seem like your data is inconsistent and you're going to wonder why, especially when you start diagnosing issues with deal closure. Like if you haven't been closing enough deals, it'll be very difficult for you to get to the source of it if you have been using 3 or 4 different list pulling tools, 5 or 6 different skip tracing companies. How do you know what the issue is? So it's better just to take out this variable and use one list pulling tool, use one skip tracing vendor, and know that that data is good enough or it's the best on the market. And if you know that, you can eliminate that if you have issues further down the road. So let's just say you aren't closing enough deals and you're wondering why. You may think that you don't have enough leads. You may think that it's something going on with your acquisitions. You never know. But if you have this part figured out, you're good to go. And you don't have to worry about, okay, well, maybe it's my list pulling tool or maybe it's my skip tracing provider. You can completely eliminate that variable from the troubleshooting process. And I've been through that multiple times where I've tried to figure out issues in my company and I've ended up jumping from one vendor to the next, thinking it was something going on with my phone numbers or my list pulling tool, when actuality, those were fine. It was something else going on in my business. But because I kept on switching around from different company to different company, I didn't know. For all I knew, it could have been their data that was messing me up, when in actuality, it was just something else that was going on in my company. So just to maintain consistency, try to keep everything the same, because then your metrics will be a lot more easier to identify any discrepancies in later down the road. So if I go from generating 100 leads a week down to 50 leads a week, and I've been using the same skip tracing tool and the same list pulling tool, then I know that, barring something just unforeseen and something that the vendors aren't telling me, really it won't go back on those vendors with being the inaccurate one. I know that has to be an issue with something else in my company, right? It could be with my lead managers. How many leads are they calling per day? It could be with my acquisitions department. How many leads are they calling a day? Things like that. So just keep that in mind. And another thing to note on this point is that the more data you pull, the more confident you're going to get in that particular tool. You're going to know which ones you like, right? So I know people that are huge on PropStream. They love that tool. I know some people that swear by ListSource. There's other ones that use Propelio. Really, guys, all this data is coming from CoreLogic. And it's just a matter of the interface that you're using and some of the filters. For instance, here in Investor Title Toolbox, I like this one, not necessarily because it's providing anything different from ListSource. I'm just able to have a little bit more customization with my filters here. So I can target sellers that have out-of-state mailing addresses. I don't know if you could do that in ListSource. I don't think so. But you can get more granular with the mortgage filters here. For instance, I can go, if I want to target properties without a mortgage, I could say, or without a second mortgage, I could say second loan amount less than or equal to 1, which is pretty much 0 for the second loan amount. So this isn't an investor title toolbox demo or anything like that. I'm just showing you guys based on my experience what I like in this particular tool. And it varies based on what you like doing. For some people, this may be too complicated for them and they just want something simple like prop stream. That is fine. You really could get to the same result by using any of these tools. It's really just down to how more granular you want to go and how dirty you want to get your hands when it comes to list pulling and skip tracing. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that cheaper skip tracing isn't necessarily better. And how do you determine what's best? And this took me a while. Skip tracing hundreds of thousands of records to really understand this concept here. And for some reason, there's a lot of miseducation out there. I just think because people see phone numbers and they just assume that all the phone numbers that they get back from anybody is accurate. But guys, I have to tell you this. These skip tracing companies are all using different data sources and data providers. Now, you have resellers, which are the ones that you're probably using right now. There are a few out there, and these people are reselling the actual data from the data source. They're not collecting the data. They're simply getting a contract from a data source and then reselling it to the public, which is a big actual help to the investment community because working with a lot of these data sources is pretty technical and pretty confusing to actually set up all this stuff yourself. So it's a lot easier usually just to go to a data vendor, but you need to be able to tell which ones have the good data and which ones don't. So there are quite a few out there that sell really bad data because they're getting it for really cheap. So imagine if they're getting it for 1 cent a search and they're charging you 20 cents a search for it. They're making a 19-cent markup on that, which is just insane. And there's nothing wrong with making money, but I'm all for doing the best by people. And I've just seen some companies sell anything and unfortunately take advantage of a lot of investors' ignorance on this topic. So I want to inform you guys what's actually going on here. Some of these companies use what's called Informion, which is basically a data provider that provides data to the collections industry and also to the legal industry, like lawyers, things like that. And there's been a couple companies that have been able to get accounts with them. And I think that's sort of underneath the radar. But this company right here, guys, I'll be honest, I've tried their data and it's not that great. And I know a couple of data providers, I won't say them right now, but I know a few big ones in the real estate industry that are reselling this data. And it's all right. It's not the best. It's not the worst. There are some other ones that are really just bad, like 411.com. See, you won't get the data straight from them, but you're probably using a skip tracing company. There's a ton out there that might be using this data. And another one is DataZap. And I hate to throw them underneath the bus, but every time I've used them, their hit rates have been very, very low. Super cheap data, but their hit rates are low and the accuracy is very low too. And on top of that, they only give you back one phone number. And that's based on what they think is the most accurate phone number, which is most likely not accurate. So I'm not a huge fan of their data. I'm a big fan of IDI data. And right now they're the industry standard. I've skip traced multiple records with them, probably close to 500 to maybe 700,000 records, probably more than that. But I really like their data and it's very accurate and they have high hit rates. So they are a data source that I would recommend. Now, I wouldn't recommend going to them directly and getting a contract with them just because I'm not a big fan of their contracts. They're very pro IDI, not pro consumer. If you need to renegotiate the terms of your contract, they're not very flexible about that. And the sales reps aren't very cooperative, just being honest. And I would just suggest using a data provider that provides IDI data. And honestly, guys, this isn't a big secret right now as far as what data providers and data sources these vendors are using. When it comes down to it, I would just ask them if you're unsure of where the data is coming from. And if they give you some answer that's really ambiguous like this, we have a multi-layered data hygiene approach where we get the best data from multiple sources. They basically said a lot without nothing. They're likely not using a solid database. And if you challenge them on that, they'll likely say it's proprietary. it's not proprietary because they're not getting the data themselves. They're just saying that to protect themselves from looking like a fool if you skip trace their data, or if you go to their actual data source and you realize that that data is not good. So just keep that in mind. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus right now, but I'm just being completely honest. And that's one thing that you guys will always get from me: honesty and transparency. And in my opinion, stick with a reseller that uses IDI data, guys. So if you aren't going to IDI themselves, use a reseller that uses their data and ask around. So if they're not telling you what data source they're using, or they're reluctant, or you would know too, if they have less than an 80% hit rate, if you're submitting lists, they're not using the best data. So IDI's data is very accurate and it has high hit rate. So anything you submit, as long as the data is solid, like your records are solid from your list pulling tool, and you provide that to them, you should get around a 90% hit rate as of the recording of this video. This is really important, guys. Just using a data provider that has good data, it's just something that you can't skimp on, guys. And you don't have to spend a lot. I know whenever I first started, there weren't really any batch skip tracing tools. And I think anyone that I saw that was doing skip tracing in bulk was around $1 a search, which is insane. That is not scalable at all. So we live in a great time where, through competition and through machine learning and artificial intelligence and so many other things, that this data has become accessible to us. So you don't have to spend an arm and a leg for it, but you have to be able to discern what's actually the good data and what's not. But that will wrap up today's video, guys. I am launching here shortly a passive income workshop, and this is an hour and 30 minutes of content. Unfortunately, I can't post it on YouTube, which is why I'm having to post it on my site because it is so long, but it is very informative, and I will be launching this on 30th of November of 2020. If you're watching this afterwards, it should be open, and I'm going to keep this up for a while. But basically, guys, this workshop is going to show you how to generate 100 seller leads in 1 month for less than $10 per lead. Really important, guys, that you understand this concept, because everything that I teach is predicated on your list pull, your market research, and we go over all of that in this workshop. So you don't want to miss this, guys. Please, if you are having trouble generating leads, if you're having trouble closing deals consistently, this workshop is really going to be for you. So if you are watching this after the 30th of November 2020, you can go ahead and register for this and watch it instantly. So keep an eye out on that, guys. And I also have something big coming here in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out on my website and also YouTube. I'm going to start posting a lot more content and go into detail why I went on a brief hiatus, probably an extended hiatus from YouTube. There's so much that I learned in the past year that I really want to share with you all. So please keep an eye out on the website and my YouTube channel, and I will be posting a lot more content, guys. Hope you have a great day.